Back in November, I started this channel with an argument for why the OM-D E-M1X was the smarter choice. Something along the lines that you could probably buy the OM-D E-M1X in a 40 to 150 f2.8 lens today, and probably buy the R6 70-200 2.8 in a year or so, for the same cost of just buying the R6 70-200 today. Has what I need right now. So was I wrong? Was the E-M1X a mistake? Is my hypothesis flawed? Having now purchased the EOS R6, I think everything I said in that first video is spot on. Don't get me wrong, the Canon R6 is technically superior. It provides better noise handling, and paired with the 100-500L, I get sharper images in a controlled setting than I do with the EM1X with the 40 to 150 Pro. The EM1X has more going for it though than just price. So let's take a closer look at how they compare to each other. If there's one thing for which the R5 is famous, it's being the first to market still camera with 8K video, raw video no less. Well, that and overheating if you used it. So overheating and 8K video in that order. And if there were a third thing, probably that's perpetually on back order. The R6 doesn't match the R5 for video options, topping out at ultra high def 4K at 60 frames per second and 1080p at 120 frames per second. And comparison to the EM1X in video isn't strictly black and white, which will go up to the slightly higher resolution of DCI Cinema 4K at 24 frames per second, while the R6 doesn't. Both cameras have a 30-minute recording limit when recording internally to SD cards. Beyond that, both cameras have additional annoyances. The Olympus camera breaks its recordings into separate files. The manual says it does this for recordings over 4 gigabytes, which makes sense, as that's the file size limit on FAT32 file systems. In practice, for DCI 4K videos, it seemed to break around 3.1 gigabytes, or at the 2-minute, 15-second mark. The OM-D does this regardless of the card's file system, while the Canon R6 won't do it if your card is formatted for exFAT. The Canon R6, on the other hand, will overheat. In practice, I don't record long enough to trigger the overheating regularly, and I've bought them both as principally stills cameras, but I did bump into the overheat warning when recording back-to-back after hitting the 30-minute mark on the R6. Finally, with respect to video, one additional benefit for the OM-D E-M1X is the ability to output Apple ProRes RAW, although that will require connecting to an Atomos Ninja 5. I've been very mixed on this. I initially dismissed it. The cost of an external recorder is a good way towards a dedicated 4K camera like the Blackmagic Pocket 4K. But there are benefits such as autofocus that the Blackmagic lacks, and depending on your needs, simply throwing the Ninja in a bag may save some space when packing. In the end, I picked up the Atomos basically because I needed a more convenient monitoring solution, and it wasn't much more expensive than a dedicated monitor, and given the added convenience, and a general HDMI recorder is useful when recording the on-screen interfaces of these cameras for these videos. While both have limitations, in general, I'd still reach for the R6 rather than the Olympus if I wanted to do video. And in fact, that's what I've done for the last few videos. I've used the R6 with the EFS 1022 attached. Photo capabilities are more obvious in the R6's favor. While both cameras offer a 20 megapixel sensor, the larger overall size and thus larger receptors give the R6 the ability to capture more light and finer detail with comparable lenses. The R6's autofocus in most situations where you're using it on people is also both stickier and quicker. The R6's FV or flexible priority mode is also a great mode which makes it easier to change between shutter priority, aperture priority, manual, and program modes quickly. It's a really great feature which hopefully other makers copy. So if you don't care about video and only care about stills, is it worth even talking about the Olympus OM-D E-M1X? Well, yes. First of all, the object recognition modes on the OM-D E-M1X, such as bird detection, are better at finding objects in the frame. And you can even limit down which autofocus points it's going to consider, unlike the R6, which always uses the full set of autofocus points. Also, unlike the R6, which often selected branches and leaves when trying to focus on small birds in cover, the OM-D E-M1X would generally find and highlight the bird. Unfortunately, once it found the bird, it would then focus on the closest object in that box, meaning it ended up no better in practice than the R6 in many situations. This makes sense technically if you consider it's probably just reverting to standard phase detection after choosing the autofocus points based on that ML, deep learning, machine learning, autofocus, blah, blah, blah. But it's a really frustrating user experience. Now, there are places the OM-D E-M1X beats out the R6. The first we've always covered, but it bears repeating. The OM-D E-M1X, the 40 to 150mm f2.8 and 2x teleconverter can be had for about $2,600 between discounts in the used market. That's roughly the cost of each of the R6 and the RF100 500 4571L lens that provides, in practice, a range of 80 to 600 millimeters at f/5.6. And because the 40-150-2.8 is one of Olympus's pro lenses, it also enables a pro capture option in the OM-D E-M1X, which is an awesome feature if you take action or wildlife photography, saving you from needing to delete spray after spray of wrongly anticipated moments. The second place where the OM-D E-M1X pulls ahead, though, and for micro four thirds shooters, you probably know where I'm going with this, is portability and handling. The R6 with the 100 to 500 isn't something that you'd want to shoot one-handed, while the OM-D E-M1X package was something I could easily carry and shoot one-handed at times, while walking with my twins in snow. There's any number of situations where that portability benefit may be important. If there's a third place the OM-D E-M1X pulls ahead, it's stabilization. Now, on paper, the R6 looks better, offering up to 8 stops compared to the 7 stops of IBIS on the OM-D E-M1X. Canon and Olympus's numbers, though, are coming from opposite directions, as you can do better with Sync IS on the OM-D, while the only RF lens longer than 105 that'll get you 8 stops is the 7200 f2.8, and on longer lenses the IBIS drops in effectiveness to the point where the 100 to 500 only gets 6 stops, lower than the OM-D E-M1X. Now, one thing that Canon did amazingly right with the RF system was the EF to RF adapter, which makes migrating from its DSLRs much less painful, and also opens up a market for older, cheaper lenses to use on your RF mount camera. Personally, while the RF adapter is fabulous, and I've used it with several lenses, I wouldn't buy the legacy EF lenses unless they were lenses that you really needed. Many of Canon's current lenses I'd expect to migrate to RF glass over time, and those are likely to be both lighter and higher quality than the existing EF lenses, not to mention more expensive. Finally, the E-M1X is made up of older tech, and in some ways this plays in its favor. The cost savings may be significant to some, and its file format is well supported by many programs. Effectively, it's the same raw file format they've used in all their micro four thirds cameras, as well as its older 4/3 cameras for that matter. Canon recently switched to a new RAW format, Canon RAW 3, which it uses in all of its Digic 8 based cameras, including the 1DX Mark III and the 90D DSLR. The CR3 format isn't well implemented in a lot of programs. Even in the version of Adobe Lightroom I have, it doesn't always work flawlessly, such as failing to render previews during import. Concerns over patents had delayed its integration in open source libraries. LibRaw, used by Raw Therapy and the File Previewer in Microsoft Windows, added support for the format in late 2019, and support in Exiv 2 raw speed, which Darktable needs, is now planned for April of 2021. Depending on your workflow, that might be another reason for you to hold off right now. So, which is the better camera? As with so much, it depends. In absolute terms, the Canon RF cameras are technically better. Still, if I had to choose one, the portability of the OM-D E-M1X system would win me over. High-res capture modes make up for the small acuity benefits the larger sensor system has for still images, while the convenience of Olympus's Pro Capture is a nice bonus for fast-paced, anticipatory situations. Both the R6 and the OM-D E-M1X are excellent tools with a good selection of lenses. You'll need to make your decision based on what's most important to you, how you weigh the pros and cons. The E-M1X's portability and price tag, compared to the superior autofocus and high ISO handling, not to mention the certain future of the RF system. For me, they both have a spot in my arsenal, at least until my 150-400 Pro arrives. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.